Welcome to part 2 of unit number 2. When we ended off last unit, we were looking at using assessment to make decisions about a number of things. We talked about instructional diagnosis and remediation. We talked about feedback to students, feedback to teachers, continuing modeling learning expectations. Assessment should embody the learning target. Should help students identify the criteria for judging how well they are learning and what's important to learn. Also for placement decision. Assignments to different levels of the same general type of instruction, education, or work all are served. No one is rejected. Then we have it's used also for classification decisions. Alignment to different but unordered categories, jobs, or programs. Let's look at key concept number 3. It says that assessment, tests, measurements, and evaluation are different but related terms. What is assessment? Here's a working definition: a broad set of activities where information is gathered and evaluations are made about the students and their learning. Tests and other formal or informal data gathering strategies used by teachers to assess the students and themselves. Another definition here is that assessments can be used before, during, or after instruction, and the information collected from them can be used by teachers to improve instruction, by students to control their own learning, or both. And then we have, of course, here performance on assessment might or might not be graded or contribute to a course grade. We can look at assessment in terms of process for obtaining information for making decisions about students, whether it's the curriculum, the program, school, or even educational policies. It also can be a systematic collection of information about students, like abilities, their characteristics, skills, understanding, and knowledge developed, administered and scored by a teacher for the purpose of evaluation. Historically, perspectives of what a test was and why it should be given or used were fairly limited. However, there were new goals, new purposes, new rules, and new perspectives in the modern classroom. The modern teacher can select from a broad array of assessment theoretical approaches and frameworks. Test. When we talk about a test, we're talking about an instrument or systematic procedure for observing and describing one or more characteristics of a student using either a numerical scale or a classification system or scheme. We are going to say much more on tests in a future unit. Measurement is a procedure for assigning numbers, usually called scores, to a specific attribute or characteristic of a person in such a way that the numbers describe the degree to which a person possesses that particular attribute. And of course we have evaluation, which we're going to look at even further in more detail. But it's a process of making a value judgment about the worth of a student product or performance. The last of the concepts here, key concept number 4, says that classroom formative and summative assessments provide teachers and students with the information that they need to improve learning and play a key role in the evaluation purpose. So what we can see clearly here is that our assessment would lead to evaluation, and we shall describe that in some more detail in a future unit. Formative evaluation of schools, programs, and materials. And as I mentioned here, it's a judgment of quality or worth, and that will be enlightened further later on. Similarly, summative evaluation is in fact the final evaluation, which we're going to, as I said, discuss a little later on in another unit. Here are some principles for good practice for assessing student learning. The assessment of student learning begins with educational values. Assessment is most effective when it reflects an understanding of learning as a multidimensional, integrated, and revealed in performance over time. Assessment works best when a program it seeks to improve have a clear, explicit stated purpose. Assessment requires attention to outcomes, but also and equally to the experiences that lead to those outcomes. And that's important to note here. Assessment works best when it is ongoing, not episodic. In other words, it must not be a one-stop shop. It must be a continuous process. Assessment fosters wider improvement when representatives from across the educational community are involved. Assessment makes a difference when it begins with the issues of use and illuminates questions that people really care about. Assessment is most likely to lead to improvement when it is part of a larger set of conditions that promote change. Through assessment, educators meet responsibilities to students and to the public. The question is asked here, why do teachers need assessment? Well, let's see what it says here. There are traditional reasons here. It diagnoses students' strengths and weaknesses. It monitors students' progress. It assigns grade. It determines instructional effectiveness. Let's look at each of them separately. Diagnosing students' strengths and weaknesses here. Test results help teachers determine the learning outcomes or the instructional objectives to pursue. In other words, based on how well students are performing, it will tell you if you need to move on or go back, as the case may be here, with your learning outcomes or instructional objectives. Then it also helps in future instruction focus on identified weaknesses. Wasteful instruction avoided through identified strengths. In other words, why teach something if your students already know it? Then what about monitor student progress? Test results help teachers determine students' progress. Test results help teachers determine if instructional changes are necessary. Time-honored and sensible use of assessment. Then assigning students grade. We're talking about the final phase of assessment. Test results help teachers determine which grade to assign. Assessments provide evidence of students' accomplishments and can be used to motivate students. Continuing with why do teachers need assessment, the traditional reason. Determine instructional effectiveness. Test results can help teachers decide if changes are necessary to instructional sequence. You can use pre-tests and post-tests. In other words, before you start your class, a test can be done to tell you exactly as a teacher what information does the students know. A post-test would be at the end to tell you what they do know in terms of going on. Why teachers need assessment? The current reason now. It influences public perception of educational effectiveness. We live in a world today where everything is being looked at in terms of effectiveness, and so assessment is needed to indicate to the public on the performance of students. It helps to evaluate teachers because, as I mentioned earlier on, how well your students perform is actually an indicator of how well you are teaching. It also clarifies teachers' instructional intentions. Another reason again for the public, it influences public perception of educational effectiveness. Public perception of schools is important. In other words, how well the public perceive a school would be how well they would have input in that school and maybe make a difference in the output of that school. Performance on accountability tests influences perception. Performance on accountability tests affects all teachers in a school or school district. In other words, if it is known publicly that your school is doing well, it gives you a sense of satisfaction as a teacher in that school. And of course, performance impacts classroom types of instruction, and of course the types of assessment that's going to be done in the classroom. On the current reason again, evaluate teachers. Test results hold teachers accountable. Test results evaluate teachers' performance. It's a specified proportion of evaluation and determines tenure, of course, promotion and merit, rate of salary, I guess, in here. It tends to clarify teachers' instructional intention. Classroom assessments, type, frequency. The bottom line is instructional methods that result in higher test scores is important for the public at large and for the school in particular. Then there's a modern classroom assessment. And the modern classroom assessment is different from assessment of days past. Assessment has changed in 3 different ways: the types of assessment used, the purpose of assessments, and the frequency to which assessments are used. All have been greatly increased in these modern times. The 5 modern classroom assessment approaches are as follows: traditional paper and pencil assessment, performance-based assessment, formative assessment, authentic assessment, universal test design. Exactly what are those approaches here? There are different ways of thinking about assessment. They represent choices made by teachers based on the philosophies, the goals, beliefs, and the value and purpose of classroom assessment. So let's look at the traditional paper and pencil assessment. Efficient, objectively scored approaches to quickly and reliably assess achievement, typically used for assessing knowledge. When used exclusively, it falls short of modern teachers' needs. Example: multiple choice, matching true, false, fill in the blank, short answer. Then we have performance-based assessment. It goes beyond low-level knowledge and understanding. It typically assesses skill or ability. It asks students to perform a skill or create a product. It requires alternative scoring options such as rubrics, and of course can lead to unique scoring difficulties due to judgment that are required. And we have formative assessment here that we can look at here. It involves collecting data during instruction. It gives feedback to students and teaches how things are going. It can guide the teacher on instructional effectiveness. And remember, that takes place during the actual teaching process. Formative assessment does not necessarily affect grades. It affects how well the students are learning. Practically, the only assessment approach found to direct and affect learning and increase standardized test scores. That's formative assessment. Then there is authentic assessment. Assessment tasks which match real-world expectation. It typically requires students to perform in ways that are valued outside of the classroom. And it may increase the meaningful of classroom assessment, but yet it has the difficulty of there being no consequences in the field of education concerning what it means to say an assessment is authentic. So that's one of the drawbacks of authentic assessment. We're going to stop here and continue in our next section. Thank you very much.